So my name's Alex. I work at a company called Etsy. And for those of you who don't know, Etsy is a marketplace for handmade and vintage products. We're based in Brooklyn, been around for about 10 years. And for those of you who do know Etsy, you may think of Etsy as the kind of place where you can go to get stuff like this. You can go to dress your baby as a turtle, or if you're really into it, you could dress your turtle like a baby. So this is kind of a snapshot of really what we see as kind of the longer-term vision for Etsy, is creating this more sort of human-scale economy that's sort of sustainable, local, and socially responsible. And so we're really more interested about trying to facilitate a kind of economy that's much more about small-scale producers connecting with each other, creating direct interpersonal kinds of commerce, and using the internet to create markets for people, for creative people and artisans that would otherwise have been very difficult for them to do in a world where they were just competing in a highly local, single place. So, but from our point of view, the kind of world that we would like to see is a world where commerce is driven more by, not so much by, big manufacturers trying to maximize efficiency, but by small-scale producers like this person. This is a woman named Yvette Morales. She's a designer in Montreal. And she's really kind of like a very close representation of a kind of archetypal Etsy seller. She's in her 30s. She's sole proprietor. She runs her own business. And like the vast majority of our sellers, about 86% of our sellers are women, which is a much higher proportion than the U.S. than the percentage of business owners in the in the U.S. at large. And for 30% of them, their Etsy store is their sole source of income. They're also largely under 35, and we see this kind of representative of some larger demographic trends we're seeing, which is a lot of people sort of consciously rejecting the kind of corporate values or sort of values of sort of global capitalism and trying to find a new way of living that's much more local, smaller scale, and really trying to find a way to express themselves and not necessarily maximizing around sort of economic output as the main criteria of what they're trying to do. And what we're trying to sort of build a business to support that. So again, this is just to sort of give you a little bit of context for what Etsy is about. But what I really want to do today is talk about sort of what we're doing from a design and research point of view. And today what I'm going to do is share several case studies with you just to give a sense of the ways we've been approaching some products recently and some things that have worked and not worked in trying to find the way to incorporate a sort of humanistic understanding of people with an approach to product development that's actually very data-driven. So a lot of what I want to talk about today is that relationship between qualitative insights and data analysis and how we've been trying to kind of work with that to evolve some of our product design. So we're a site that's all about things being handmade, and we very much see Etsy itself as a handmade thing. One of our internal slogans is "Code is craft." And I guess what Etsy's kind of sort of known for in the tech industry is, among engineers, is having a culture of continuous deployment. We don't really use terms like agile or lean or things like that, but we do have an environment where people, any engineer in the company can push code live to the site at any time, and any designer can actually push code live at any time. And some people hear that and they're kind of horrified. Like, how could that possibly work? How much can that scale? We're finding out. But as we've been doing more research over the past year especially, we've been doing more and more ethnographic style research, going out in the field and trying to look for kind of deeper insights that can help us identify new opportunities that aren't always so evident from looking at behavioral data in our server logs. And we've been spending a lot of time going out to seller studios and really trying to get contextual insights about what they're doing. So this is one example where we had a team who was looking at the process of what happens after somebody sells something on Etsy, right? So you've got your sale, you're done, you've got your money, now all you have to do is ship the thing. But we're interested in sort of understanding that process a little bit, because it's a little bit invisible to us, right? Like, we can see what happens on the system, but we can't really see what happens beyond that. And so we had our team, including one of our researchers, went out and did a whole bunch of seller visits where we went and picked up some really interesting cues. One thing we found very consistently, and it was really surprising, was that the print artifact of the sold order page was actually a critical part of people's workflow. From our point of view, all we could really see was people were on the system, they'd close the order, they moved on. But once we got in there in the field and actually watched what people are doing, From the seller's point of view, a lot of that workflow really kicks in at the point when they get that order, they print it out, and this is actually a very common pattern that we saw where people were, taking these, these sold order forms and using them as kind of workflow management tools in a very visual way. So this person was managing her sort of shipping flow this way. We also noticed that people were doing interesting things with packing slips. So once they were shipping the orders, if you can see them down in the bottom left there, people were adding all kinds of additional information onto the packing slip. And we saw this repeatedly where people were like kind of using these, these slips of paper in ways that we hadn't totally intended them for. For example, a lot of sellers like to write handwritten notes, where they're adding additional information or if something's been customized. So we realized there was kind of an opportunity here. So we went back to the data analyst team and said, hey, we're noticing people are using these, printouts in interesting ways. What kind of data do you have on that, about this? This is just sort of a hypothesis we have. Well, found out that we weren't tracking that. It wasn't something anyone had ever thought to look at. So we asked them to instrument it so that we could actually fire an event whenever somebody prints something. We found out, oh, actually almost half of our sellers are actually printing these things out. It seems like this is actually an important part of the process. So based on that hypothesis, we went back and used a lot of this sort of contextual data to then really take a hard look at this kind of post-order process and create a lot more customization options around it. So this is an example of the open orders page where you can, basically where the process starts, and then once you get into it, we created a lot of flexibility here where you can tweak this, in terms of what do you want a packing slip, do you want the order receipt, what kind of information do you want to add to it, and making this a very flexible and a customizable experience. We also created the ability to sort of batch process these things. So you can, a lot of sellers like to batch up their orders and ship them on a Tuesday. So we wanted to support that workflow. And ultimately you could get something that looks like this that, can be customized in a bunch of different ways. So I think just a good example where, important to be aware of what you're not measuring and get out in the field and get sort of real world insights that might help, jog some ideas about new product ideas. So, and so we've been doing a fair amount of sort of survey work. Earlier this year, we hired our first quantitative UX researcher who's been really figuring out how do we create some instrumentation around customer feedback and figure out how do we capture customer sat metrics across the site. So with this particular experiment, we've been able to bake that into our A/B testing environment so that we can basically capture customer sat within an A/B test on variations so that we can then add that to the mix in addition to conversion rates and other more traditional business metrics. To give you a little more detail on what that looks like, some of the things we're looking at, customer satisfaction, look and feel, product browsing. But one of the interesting outcomes of this particular experiment is we sort of expected there would be a positive lift with conversion. We expected that there would be some general satisfaction with search and browse. One of the interesting findings, though, was that we also found that by exposing these facets and these categories, we were able to increase perceptions of the breadth of merchandise offered on Etsy. So it actually filtered into kind of a brand perception issue as well. I think one of the issues we'd seen was that people, or a hypothesis we had was that a lot of people didn't really understand the breadth of what was on Etsy. They just think, kooky gifts and, crochet and doilies and things like that. And so by actually, providing those kind of subtle cues that there's all the other stuff, it actually did create a lift in sort of perceptions of breadth of product, which we think boosts sort of the brand perception, which we think is a long-term sort of conversion outcome, but it's a little hard to prove that. So let's see. So this just gives you a little bit of visibility on some of the things we're looking at in terms of trying to measure different dimensions of the customer experience, is trying to quantify that and introducing that sort of quantitative UX data as an additional business metric that we can look at, in addition to the more traditional kind of metrics around, revenue and conversion and things like that. So, I think when we're all talking about user experience and design and research, there's often kind of a business context of that. And there's nothing wrong with business, but I think, we also are all in a certain context where, we live in a world that's largely dominated by, fairly big corporations, by the global movement of capital, by a certain sort of ideology of what business should be about, which is largely about scale, about getting bigger, about getting more efficient, about being productive. And I just want to sort of invite you to think about that a little bit in terms of what is the purpose of the business that we're involved in. And there's an interesting sort of emerging kind of argument coming out. There's a guy named Paul Mason from the Guardian wrote a book about this called The End of Capitalism. There's sort of an interesting theory that we're seeing sort of the rumblings of a larger sort of shift in the world economy, where we may be seeing the beginning of the end of kind of global capitalism, that we're seeing some of the systems that, for the last 200 years through the industrial era are starting to maybe reach kind of a breaking point. I guess if I can leave you with one final thought, it would be have the courage to think small. So, great. So thank you.